Welcome to Do the Woo, the podcast where we talk about all things WooCommerce.
You're Katie Keith.
I'm muted. I'm Katie Keith, founder and CEO at Barn2, and I get the intro wrong every time.
And I'm James Kemp. I'm the core product manager for WooCommerce. And today we're going to be talking about how we can all market WooCommerce as a community, focusing on what our real strengths are, and also a bit of an insider insight into how the Woo marketing team works.
Yeah, well, I believe that as a community, we're not marketing WooCommerce as well as we could be. And I'm not talking Woo, I'm talking about all of us, everybody watching this who works with WooCommerce in any way. So this episode is about how we can all work together to do that better. Tamara, thank you so much for coming on. Could you give us a bit of an overview of your work and what you do at Woo?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. This is definitely a conversation I'm excited to have. So thanks for the invite. I lead marketing and go-to-market for Woo. And that means that my team works across brand, product marketing, developer advocacy, demand gen, partnerships, events, sales enablement, very big, broad scope. As we like to say in marketing, it's very much a symphony with folks playing different instruments to bring beautiful music together. In order to help merchants, help our builders, our agencies, our community, the developers, and our partners understand not only why Woo is the right choice, but when it's the right choice and how to be successful with it. But if I can deviate from an intro for a second, I also would love to express some gratitude here. I believe strongly since joining here that I've learned, Woo very much exists because of the community. Agencies, plugin developers, educators, contributors, our hosts, our payment and our tech partners, and our merchants have all helped us really become what it is today. Woo become what it is today. So when we talk about, I'll say this right now, like official Woo marketing, which I'll dub myself as, I don't see that as replacing a community voice. I see it as investing back into the flywheel. So I wanted to say that I thought it was an important note to make. So thank you.
Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah, definitely a good point to make. So while we're going through our conversation with Tamara, feel free to ask your questions. We will try and answer any questions that get asked. And I think you should be able to ask wherever you are watching this.
Yep. And before we get into the topic, since we're still a relatively new podcast, I think we've been going 5 months now. Please subscribe if you don't already. Again, you can do that wherever you're watching this. On YouTube, we're Do the Woo Podcast, Do the Woo on X, and the website is dothewoo.com, where it's got all the different places that you can subscribe. So please do that.
Yeah. So let's dive in. I think, Tamara, first of all, it would be interesting to know sort of how the Woo team operates as a marketing function, and what role you think the wider community should play in the marketing of WooCommerce.
Great question. And the reason I was excited to have this conversation was to talk exactly about this, because I think I like to think about it as less of a hard line and more of a shared system. Official Woo, as I said, I will refer to myself as, for the purposes of this conversation, has a responsibility to create clarity. I believe that we need to be crisp about who Woo is for, where we win, what we're investing in, and what proof exists behind those claims that we make. We need to make the message easier for our partners, our agencies and developers, so that they can reuse that or amplify it without having to reinvent it from scratch. But the reality is the community has a very different type of credibility. When an agency or a developer says, we choose Woo for this merchant because they needed B2B pricing or editorial content or 3 different payment providers, whatever it might be, when they say that, or when you say that, it lands very differently than when Woo says it or when I say it as the company ambassador. And then when a plugin company shows how their product extends a strong platform, I believe that helps the whole ecosystem. And when the community helps merchants understand, for example, total cost of ownership in language and proof points they can understand, that also counts as marketing. So I think that if I were to really sum this up, I believe that we should provide the backbone, the positioning, the proof, the merchant stories, partner programs, opportunities for co-marketing, participating in events, and enablement. And then the community can bring those lived examples, the builds, the migrations, and the hard-won lessons, the nuance that we can't. And we can also call out even agencies explicitly here, because the reality is, what I've learned over my course or career in commerce, if you will, is that merchants don't choose platforms in isolation always. They're maybe getting word of mouth recommendations from their peers, but perhaps they're also working with an agency or a freelancer, a tech partner, and they help shape that decision. And so our entire ecosystem of marketing across Automatic, not just Woo, but Automatic for agencies, our partner events, our co-marketing, all of this really matter so much. I would also say that one thing is that's really important that I want to get across is that the Woo ecosystem has always worked, in my opinion, because people participate in it. And that's a really important difference for, open source and WooCommerce, because you can build extensions, you can build the stores and teach and consult and contribute. And that's why I believe that the community has been vibrant for so long. And our marketing work should help that economy grow, not try and centralize all of the story inside of Woo.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's quite a challenging thing to market, right? Because even down to what are you marketing? So with the example of closed platforms, it's quite straightforward. You market to the website, people sign up, create an account, and they're in. And I think with WooCommerce, we have a much more challenging approach to marketing, because we can talk about the platform and everything that it can do for you as an agency, as a builder, as a merchant. But it's hard, in my opinion, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, to market it directly to merchants, because there's no clear entry point for them. They have to understand WordPress, they have to understand hosting, and there's steps that they have to go through, which are essentially barriers to get set up with WooCommerce, which if they're not aware of the flexibility and the benefits of running their store on WooCommerce, might put them off. So I'm interested on your thoughts on that specifically. I guess I feel like the developer and builders understand WooCommerce and the WordPress ecosystem, but maybe new merchants don't understand that and maybe don't want to.
Yeah, and it is a very difficult task at hand. And I think in the last 2 years, we've done a better job of getting out into the market and explaining what WooCommerce is. But that hasn't been the easiest. We have perception challenges in the market. Many folks think that they do know us, that we're for starting and entrepreneurs, but reality is we have a lot of very high volume merchants on the platform as well. But the tricky part is, how do you get started? And so I think you mentioned this, James, there is friction in that journey. And so we need to reduce and remove those barriers as much as we can. And so when you learn about Woo, we want to bring you to a centralized place where we can educate you on where you can go next. If you want to get started on Woo, here's the best place to go. Here are some hosting options. Here are some merchants that look like you. Here's our marketplace where you can access all of those extensions and ways to build your store that works for you. And if that's not the path that you want to take, we call that, a little bit of a self-serve or do-it-yourself path. Perhaps you want to work with a developer and agency, and it's our job to serve that up as well and make sure that if that's the option you're looking for, here's the path to do that. Or if you're looking to, build this custom platform and stitch together, integrate with your tech stack, then we do have a path where you can, speak with our happiness engineers or our sales folks to help them guide you through this process, because I won't say it's necessarily complex, but there's optionality. And I think that's part of the beauty of it. And teaching folks the best path for them is part of our job.
Yeah. What do we know about who is the target market in terms of roughly what proportion, you may have no idea, I don't know, is end users choosing their own store, i.e. merchants, and people that are building it on behalf of clients? Because that's a very different message, isn't it? The people that are going to recommend it many times as part of their work and have an instrumental influence on whether the clients they work with are going to use Woo or whatever else they recommend, versus people choosing their own website who may not know what things like hosting are.
I don't know the exact splits, but I can share that when you look at the different segmentation within the merchant base, we do have confidence that, more complex builds or those who are generating more gross merchandise volume or GMV or revenue typically are leaning more towards working with developer agencies, creative agencies to build their stores, especially as they become more custom bespoke, or maybe they have in-house developers as well. But that's typically where that build starts. And then for the self-serve, do-it-yourself, that's more on the long tail and the higher volume of merchants we have on the platform. I realize I'm using the word volume interchangeably here. But I would say that they are more on their own, learning how to build this themselves. But then if you also come through the Woo front door, we can direct you to more of a managed hosting product that is easier to get set up. So there is really something for everyone, but we do have to be crystal clear on what that is and help them make that decision, without getting too overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think I have two follow-ups on that. One is regarding the data we have. So during the onboarding, there's a question that kind of hints at, are you a merchant or are you a developer? It's phrased along the lines of like, I think the question, I don't know if it's a question, but it's like, I'm setting this store up for myself, or like I'm already running a store, or I'm setting this store up for someone else. So it's not directly asking what type of user you are, but it kind of hints at it. And I think we could be more direct, to be honest, because I'm aware that probably most agencies and builders configuring websites for people aren't going through the onboarding anyway.
True.
So we lose that, as a point. And the second point,
that's good feedback.
Yeah, we definitely we need to work on that because it is valuable, like, to have that information. The second point was regarding hosting choice. I know one of the things that we have to cater to is that WooCommerce is available to any host. We have hosts that we partner with, but any host can essentially, sell a WooCommerce offering as a plan. One of the things we do on the WooCommerce marketing website is to recommend some hosts when they get to the point of, okay, I'm a merchant, I want to set up WooCommerce. And I think what we don't necessarily do is explain why they should choose any one of those hosts. And to them, that's like, okay, I don't really know what a host is, and now I have to choose from one of these four things just based on essentially brand. So I think we could do better there to kind of guide the merchant to a specific host without looking, preferential to any one host. It's also a reason why we can't offer it, as only our offering.
I agree with you. And I think we can do a better job working with our hosting partners to get that differentiated messaging in our hosting pages, have that more fluid handoff process. There's absolutely room for, making it smoother, optimizing, et cetera there. Good feedback there too.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because the very fact that you have to choose hosting is a barrier for people that don't already know about it. In a way, it's a great thing because of that flexibility, the whole self-hosted thing. But for people that are just comparing it against other e-commerce platforms, they don't understand, well, why do I have to do this? Because they haven't come to it from that angle. So it's a really difficult one. And I know lots of people are saying, bring back Woo Express or whatever, which may or may not solve the problem.
Yeah, I think one thing we could do is to sort of have a pre-onboarding step there where we're asking the merchant about their store, how many products they have, and then either map it to the most appropriate host or just present them with one like randomized host every time. So, every host is getting equal amount of exposure.
Yeah, I would challenge you that on that, James. I'd like to make sure that merchants have the host that is best for their business goals, their needs at the time. Can I start with this host today and then scale with it later on? Will it meet my, product SKU or variant count requirements? I think there's more qualification that we could do there to help both the merchant and the host, make mutually beneficial decisions there. But agree with the sentiment on making that easier, making it easier to understand what it means to have the option to choose a host versus it just being baked in. It's something that I struggled to wrap my head around when I first joined WooCommerce, coming from a SaaS organization. And so we need to better explain the value of that and making sure that people don't outgrow the host that they choose in the first place.
Yeah, 100%. I think one concern would be that possibly, every host would say, we're the best one. Like we'll definitely be able to manage like 100,000 orders a day or something. So it's a case of validating that. But yeah, I think the sentiment is to just remove choice overload and just really like streamline that process into actually getting running.
Yes, I like to talk about the paradox of choice often. And there's folks that want that, endless opportunity to choose what they want. And then there's folks that come in and want some recommendations, some opinions coming from commerce experts, like the community, like WooCommerce.
Yeah, definitely. I often say WordPress and its flexibility is kind of the Woo's biggest advantage and also its biggest disadvantage. Because of that, it's good if you want the choice, but it's actually quite confusing if you don't. And that's not WooCommerce's fault. It's just is part of WordPress. But that reminds me, a minute ago, you said that part of the role of the Woo marketing team is to help guide the positioning of the community and how we all present it. So I'd like to talk about some work that I've been doing, which was largely in leading up to my Checkout Summit talk a couple of months ago, where I did a lot of work. The background to this is also that we've been expanding into building Shopify apps for the last year and a half or so. And that's taught me a lot about kind of when WooCommerce is the best and when it's not. And yeah, there's actually plenty of times when it is the best. And so that's crystallized my thinking that we all need to understand better when it's the best and when it's not, so that and also why it's the best. So I think it's quite important that we get our heads around this. I published a blog post. I'll just put it on the screen briefly. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Narrow my browser a bit. And basically, I went through all the reasons that I think we should use WooCommerce over Shopify specifically, but also things that I think we say, and I hear this from the top at Automatic, reasons to use it that I don't think are valid. And I hear this a lot. You can't do anything with Shopify. That's more the community saying it. This is a Matt Mullenweg one, I'm afraid, because he is so passionate about open source that he believes that everybody else is. And so he thinks that things like open source and data ownership are absolute goods, when I think that from the merchant's perspective, actually, they might be a means to an end, but you have to focus on what is the benefit to the merchant. And so I don't think that pointing out it's open source is actually particularly helpful. So anyway, I went through various reasons, and at the end, just scrolling through, I came up with a checklist of when I think we should, I've lost it, promote WooCommerce. Here we go, 5 real reasons to use it. So in my opinion, the reasons are when you want to build big websites that are not just e-commerce, Like when you want major content management, for example. Shopify is rubbish at that. I tried to create a page in Shopify this week and got totally stuck. That's pretty basic, how hidden away and unimportant it was. So you're not dependent on one company, because if even, not saying Automatic's going to go anywhere, but even if it did, your store would still exist. Whereas Shopify disappears, your store's dead immediately. And then you've got all the control side of things that we talked about, and it can be cheaper. So for me, those are the key reasons that we need to be focusing on to use WooCommerce, and not things like open source. So I'm keen to get your feedback on that and what maybe we can do about it.
I've read your blog post and quite a few times actually, and I absolutely agree with the spirit of this fairly strongly. I think, you saying it out loud is a useful challenge, something that we should talk about, something that we should focus on, because if our pitch, to go back to the Shopify piece, is, Shopify is locked down and Woo is open source and we have community, like that's not enough. Some of those statements are actually incomplete, and some of them are not how merchants make decisions. You know this, Katie. They're asking more practical questions like, can this platform support my business model? What will it cost as I grow? What will it cost from the minute I start? Can I integrate with the rest of my tech stack, or can I use the payment providers I already have? Can I change hosts if they know about hosting, that is? And more importantly, can I grow without assuming that there's a replatforming in my future? And I think that this is where open source becomes powerful, but we do have to translate it. Open source is really the foundation, the backbone, and the merchant outcome needs to be control, choice, portability, or adaptability and ownership. And so I don't think that we should stop talking about open source, but I would stop treating it like the final answer. It is the reason behind the answer, if you will. And I think that's important. And, if we want to get into where Woo really wins, they are more practical use cases. And you've alluded to them. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say I'm kind of taking some of them because they're very valid. The first one is content and commerce together. You've said this. Woo is built on WordPress, and there's so much value in that. And in any case, there's trade-offs in any solution that one has. But with WordPress being, the CMS that's powering majority of the internet, that matters more now than less. I think you call this out in your blog post too. If a store is a media engine or a membership site, an event hub or a course platform, B2B resource hub, whatever it might be, Woo has this structural advantage because commerce isn't bolted onto content, it lives with it. And that's a really powerful piece. And then there's, you call this out too, independence from a single vendor. That's choice. And that's, creating independence for merchants so that they can choose their host and their payment providers, their extensions, what they need, what they don't need. I mean, they have the opportunity to say, here's what I need today, and then I can change that as I scale over time. Or perhaps I want to enter a new market, or I want to try a new business model or product. And that is no longer a philosophy and a nice to have. It becomes like important for business continuity. It also becomes negotiation leverage as you scale and reduces risks in many cases. We talk a lot about payment flexibility and checkout flexibility. That's critical. Payments is one of the biggest parts of commerce economics, and not pushing one merchant into a provider or penalize them for choosing a payment provider that works for their geography, their region, or their operating model. And then the checkout piece, and I know you called this out, Katie, but and maybe it's not as flexible as and customizable in areas that you'd like to see, but it is still very flexible and approachable. You don't have to pay this fee to get this checkout flexibility and customization. And that's where the total cost of ownership comes in. Oh. Sorry, are you hearing that? A little bit of a background noise, but we'll push through it. But I think I was talking about total cost of ownership. Yes. And this becomes really important. And as merchants grow, obviously so do costs, because serious commerce does have costs, but the product is free to start and it gives more control. Costs can scale with you. And it's our developer and our agency ecosystem that also help us do this. You can understand the platform, you can understand how to shape it in a way that the merchant has needs for, whether it's cost constraints or, customizability, or maybe they want to build weird, cool things. That's where our community also shines. And then I'll say one more point, because I know I'm going on and on here, but I did have a chance to think about this coming into this meeting, to this podcast. There's no ceiling. There are high volume businesses running on Woo today. We're proving Woo at a higher complexity. And that really helps everyone. It creates better evidence for the ecosystem. It shows merchants they can grow without assuming a future migration, and it funds more investment back into the platform. So
yeah, absolutely. You saying that, and I kept hearing a message that people kept saying at press conf, which is that once someone gets to between 1 and 5 million in revenue a year, they leave WooCommerce and move to Shopify. And I thought, what the hell? Why would that? I don't know where this myth has come from. There's no reason that Woo can't scale. People say all the time that Woo can scale to massive revenue and millions of products. And yet I discovered that there's this myth floating around, leaders in the WordPress community who are going to PressConf. And I didn't understand why they were saying that. So it's quite scary.
Well, I guess I need to go to PressConf.
Yeah,
we got to go there. We should show up. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's tell this story together.
Yeah, because it came up a lot, and then people talking about Woo and its challenges, and then this myth from different people. So it would be worth having representation at these places. But then I'm obviously challenging as well and saying, why would you need to move just because you've got high revenue?
I guess it goes back to the like hosting question right at the beginning, because potentially, I don't know what happened there. Potentially, WooCommerce could not scale if you choose a very, very basic host with no like scalability path right at the beginning. And I think that's probably where that myth comes from. So maybe people reach the limits of whatever hosting they chose initially. Whereas I think there's a point in time, and maybe you can do this from the beginning, where you need to consider choosing a host that's very performant, like at scale, and making that a priority. Whereas I think in these closed platforms, they do that part of it for you. So there's some thought that needs to happen, which I guess if you're a merchant who's chosen WooCommerce with no sort of technical understanding, you won't necessarily be aware of this. And maybe that's on us to identify like what minimum performance requirements look like for a given volume of store. Something that we can point at and say, that this is the type of hosting offering that you need for your volume and for your number of products in your catalog, that kind of thing. And maybe this kind of leans back onto that initial getting the merchant on board to a given hosting plan, that they should choose one that aligns with whatever their future position looks like, and making it easy to migrate if they need to, or upgrade or switch, anything like that.
They don't necessarily know their future path from the outset. So we're talking about once they reach that revenue level. It appears that instead of simply changing hosts, they are rebuilding their entire website in Shopify when they could move hosts. We've got a comment from Elliot Richmond who says, I'm referring to Shopify, it's a much more holistic, seamless approach for entrepreneurs, which it does make sense because it's all tailored around e-commerce, whereas WooCommerce is on a WordPress site, so it's going to have all this other stuff as well, which might be a good thing, but it does make the e-commerce side less focused, doesn't it? But they must have known that from the beginning. So why are they moving when they scale?
And I think we have it's the onus is on us, and to help the community also share this message that we do have high volume merchants on the platform that are seeing success, and we need to tell their stories, more loudly, show up at industry events, put them at the front and center of our marketing efforts, because that's the proof. We were at Shop Talk Europe, what was it, a week and a half ago in Barcelona, and we spoke and met with many merchants. And one of the first questions they ask are, what merchants do you have on the platform that resemble the challenges I'm trying to solve? Do they have the same scale as I do? And we've got a library that we are showing, but we have to do more there. We have to invest more in those merchant stories, lean on the community. The reality is, the developers, the plugin builders, our agencies often know about these stories well before we do, because we don't always have a relationship with WooCommerce merchants. This is open source. And so we're often relying on the community to bring those forward. But we love that. Bring those merchant stories forward so we can tell them. It's great co-marketing. It helps the community as well. All boats rise when we can tell those stories.
I think we have a question from Simon which relates to this. He asked it on X earlier. This is one. He says, I would love to see WooCommerce create a video podcast showcasing success stories and the software itself. I also, Jamie, who is the head of WordPress at Automatic, head of WordPress YouTube at Automatic, reached out the other day suggesting that we could do something like this on the WooCommerce YouTube channel, which doesn't get masses of attention right now, and is probably a good place to talk about some of this stuff.
Yes, and I love that suggestion. I would also love to be able to do that. I also wonder if maybe I'll put this group on the spot. Could we bring some of those stories to do the Woo as well? Could we make that promoting merchants and the developers and the agencies that even help them? I think that's one avenue. But yes, I would love to do something like that. And we are in places where perhaps you're not receiving necessarily the marketing in some cases, but we are showing up more in to your comment around seeing Woo in more places, paid search and paid social, paid campaigns. We're running more full funnel, all the way from awareness down to the bottom of the funnel, showing up at more events. We're really trying to put Woo in places where we see market growth opportunities, where we see merchants having success on the platform, to try and engage with them and create that relationship as well. But yes, I would love to have a dedicated podcast to Woo merchants. And that's our shared customer, all of the community that we're talking about. The one thing that's at the center of our relationship is that shared merchant. So promoting them is a win-win. And, after being at Shop Talk Europe, I keep saying last week, a week and a half ago, it was such an awesome feeling to meet with customers, to hear about what they're doing, how they're innovating, how they're overcoming some challenges. It really filled my cup, and getting back to the merchants is really what will fuel our mission. So love that suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that does also fall under the remit of Do the Woo. I would love to see Woo steal Jamie for maybe half the time or something, because the Woo channel's important too. And I think Jamie in particular could do a great job at building that up, as he has the WordPress one.
All right, Jamie, consider that your seed planted.
And should we move on to Simon's other question as well, which is, will we ever see WooCommerce running ads on the radio, TV, streaming apps, billboards, social media, etc.?
Well, there's a bit of a running joke internally on the Woo marketing team that one of these days I will have a billboard. I would love to see WooCommerce on billboards, out of home advertising, as we like to refer to it. But we are finding ourselves in some places like podcast advertising. So if you're familiar with Retail Brew or Morning Brew, we've been featured on there. That there's more content syndication happening. So trying to find ourselves in mediums where merchants are, where they're digesting information, and then showing up at those industry events, as I mentioned. We had some more physical presence at Shop Talk Europe. We had a presence at Shop Talk USA. We're going to e-commerce expo in London in a few months. And so we're really trying to get our name out there from an awareness standpoint. But we do want to be where merchants are, as opposed to more broad awareness, just because we do have limited resources and we've got to really try and get the most squeeze out of the juice, or whatever the saying might be.
Yeah, I had a call with Woo's marketing team maybe a year ago, and then you published something following up from that. You made your presentation public, I think. And I asked this question, and you were very clear that the target is merchants with more than $1 million a year revenue. and that meant that the paid advertising, given the budget, was going to be very targeted and not broad brush like billboards. Is that still the strategy?
I think it's an evolving one, just to fall back on that. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it's important to say that it's not our only focus. Like you said, you take a limited amount of resources and you do have to, choose where you're going to get the most bang for the buck. And you can't peanut butter that. Otherwise, you don't, get the impact. And the reason why, targeting, not necessarily alienating the smaller merchants, but targeting the larger one is really a way to get economies of scale, if you will. We don't believe that Woo will be only a platform for large merchants. It's always been a place where someone can start small, test an idea, and build from there. The platform is free and it's open source for a reason. And that starting point matters deeply. I never want to get away from that. That's so important to, what WooCommerce is, what WordPress is, our ethos. It's for builders. It's for those who want to scale and grow. But what we are trying to do by targeting that type of merchant is to make sure that the growth story, or should I say showcasing that type of merchant as well, is to make sure that that growth story is just as credible as the starting story. Because one of the myths that hurts Woo, and I don't know that you called it out in your article, Katie, but it's really that it's the idea that we're only for small stores or hobbyists or businesses that will eventually graduate to something else, like they're saying
Good
at
point.
PressConf. And we don't think that's true. And so we have to focus, or no, we don't have to. So when we focus on, more complex or higher volume merchants, we also build proof that Woo can grow with businesses. And that proof helps everyone. It helps agencies, it helps the plugin builders, it helps new merchants have confidence that they won't choose the wrong platform when, they grow and scale. And transparently, if, we can attract some of those complex, higher volume merchants, and we have, relationships with them from a revenue standpoint, that allows us to invest back more into the product, into the ecosystem, and allows the community more to even build their businesses around us. So I think, I want to put a really sharp pin on this. Like, we're not abandoning starters. We are proving that starters can grow here, while also efficiently trying to get the most out of our marketing dollars.
I guess the approach then is mainly around brand awareness and just recognizing that WooCommerce is a viable option, rather than trying to, directly pull people in to get them to set up a store, which I think is the typical kind of marketing you see from like closed platforms where, you have a landing page, they sign up.
It's easier to measure that, that's for sure. This is a difficult, complex role, and I think we have to be able to do it all. We have to, you can't abandon one start or one portion of the customer journey or the marketing funnel, if you will. You have to create the awareness. You do have to try and, bring them and generate traffic, and then direct that traffic and convert it in the, where it makes sense for the merchant by putting the merchant first. And you called this out earlier. That's really difficult when, there's 3 or 4 starting journeys for any one merchant. But again, those are the trade-offs, and there's a lot of positive opportunity because of that, in my opinion.
Agreed. Yeah, I think in light of that, it'd be interesting to talk about how we as a community can begin to sort of align ourselves with how WooCommerce is approaching marketing, and market and recommend WooCommerce in the same way, based on what our role is. So we have plugin companies that build on top of WooCommerce. I know I used to do this, where the way that we would sell our product is to say, WooCommerce can't do this, so we built a plugin for it, rather than kind of framing it as this enhances WooCommerce.
It's so easy to fall into that
Yes.
trap. I know we have blog posts that start like that, and it's meant to be, this makes it even better, not Woo can't do this.
Yeah, and I think that was traditionally like a good way to, deal with your SEO. Like, people were looking to solve a specific problem. Your post or product page or whatever solves that problem. So you're framing your product as a solution to the problem. which is technically true, but I think they could be framed more as enhancements. And I also think the landscape of SEO has shifted quite dramatically since I was doing anything like that with Iconic, where people aren't coming in the traditional way. They're more than likely, especially builders and agencies, asking the AI agent of choice how to solve any particular issue, and then it will recommend ways to do it. So I think there's probably a shift that we could take there for plugin companies. And then I think there's also builders and agencies that are recommending WooCommerce to their merchants that they work with. And then we also have this kind of angle of content creators, educators that can recommend WooCommerce. So I'm interested in your take, Tamara, on what Woo's perspective is on each of those different, or as a whole, like how we recommend WooCommerce as a community, so that we align with the message that WooCommerce is putting out, and maybe how we can help with that.
Well, I mean, I think you somewhat covered the entry point to this, and I would love to also frame, or in some cases reframe, that how building for Woo is a platform advantage. So like you said, for plugin companies, it could mean, rather than saying, hey, Woo can't do this, so buy our plugin, to reframe of Woo gives you a flexible foundation and our plugin helps you take that foundation into a specific use case. I think that positions the product as an additive and really makes the platform stronger at the same time. So I agree with your framing there. And then for the agencies, having an honest recommendation framework is really important. Woo is a great fit when merchant needs content plus commerce, as we talked about, or control over the payments or the infrastructure, or deeper customization, B2B, et cetera, or needs a tech stack that can adapt over time. So I think agencies in particular should be able to explain that in a way that the merchant understands. Not just technical language if it's a developer type agency, but really leaning into the pain points and meeting the merchant where they're at, their customer. And Woo has a role in doing that too. Like when we talk about this awareness and the solutions that Woo has to offer, that ultimately, if I can speak marketing or sales jargon for a minute here, it helps accelerate those sales cycles if it means that the shared customer actually understands what the platform has to offer when they actually go to meet with either an agency or a developer. So that's part of our job, is to reduce that unknown, if you will. And then for the educators, their creators, I think the opportunity is translation. We talked about hosting. Help merchants understand the trade-offs or the benefits of choosing particular hosts. Help them understand the TCO, the total cost of ownership, and the math there, and why in particular cases data ownership might matter more to them in practical terms versus other business models, or maybe the region that they're operating in. And ultimately, this helps us translate how open source, isn't just ideology, it's optionality. And then I mentioned this earlier, but I will never stop saying this: tell more merchant success stories. We don't have that direct relationship with every merchant. And as I said earlier, like agencies and developers and plugin builders know some of these interesting stories often before we do, or if we even do at all. We want to show the merchants the business outcomes, tie it to metrics where we can, how we build to solve real world problems so that other people can say, hey, I also had that problem. Okay, Woo can help me. Oh, and that agency can help me. And that plugin might be the real fix to the issue that I'm having right now. And help them work through that complexity. Because what I'm hearing more and more, as commerce is more accessible online to more and more merchants around the world, is that they do have unique needs, not one size fits all in many cases, but they don't always know the path to being able to solve for that. And so often they're making concessions and they don't want to. But what I do know to be true is they want to see the proof. They want to see people that look like them, operate like them, and have problems just like theirs succeeding on Woo and with our partners. For official Woo, that's me. We need to do more partner assets, clear proof points that are evolving with the way that the world of commerce is also evolving. Stronger case studies. I would love to provide more co-marketing opportunities. have those community voices at our events, like we did just at Shop Talk Europe. Like having the community speak on our behalf is far more powerful than us saying it directly.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. We obviously have a marketplace full of product builders that build on top of WooCommerce, and I used to sell on there as a vendor, and I seem to recall we would allow those vendors to kind of share stories on the WooCommerce blog. I don't know if we still do, but I think something like that is valuable for both, merchants looking at the product, trying to find a solution to their issue, but also an incentive to sell on the marketplace, which we have an episode coming up about the marketplace. Kind of like you say, the co-beneficial marketing. I think that kind of aspect of it would be quite interesting.
Yeah. And Katie, if I may, I would love to ask you for a second, what can we provide to the community? You are close to merchants, builders. You're thinking a lot about the value that Woo has to bring to the table, but how could we help you become a better advocate more than you already are today?
I think for kind of product people, it's largely leading from the front with a consistent message about what are the reasons. But in a way, I think the key group here is the builders, which I am not in the sense of building sites for clients. I think they are the people. So I'm indirectly recommending WooCommerce through my blog posts, for example. But I think the most key group are the ones that are directly building the sites for the clients. So I wonder whether Woo has like almost a pack or a presentation deck or something, because these people, they're having clients contact them saying, I want an e-commerce site. What is Woo providing to them to help them sell Woo?
Yeah, that's we actually have, this is a bit of a plug, so forgive me. But we have our Automatic for Agencies program, where as being part of that program, we do offer enablement, shared pitch decks, if you will, co-selling motions, and the co-marketing component, where we do show up at events together, or we sponsor some of our agencies to attend certain industry type events or join us in some cases. So that program is really the avenue to be able to do that. But at the same time, also, more than happy to have conversations with folks that aren't in that program. I'm always looking to learn more and share more about Woo. So we do have those tools available, and just get in touch.
And I guess that program is going back to like the onboarding of new merchants. That program is a good starting point for us to be able to recommend, agencies or builders to work with, I guess. Because they're already, validated as these are high quality places to get a WooCommerce website built.
Yeah, and Shani, who I believe is one of your developer advocates, says we have even more enablement coming, Katie.
Interesting.
Awesome.
If you want to give any details, put them in the comments and we'll read it out, but maybe it's not announced yet.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. Katie, I don't know if you had any further points to raise.
Let's move on to some comments, because we've got a few comments that have come in, largely about why Woo is the best. So let's read those out.
Keep those coming.
Shani first. We love weird, cool things. Actually, there's more meaning to that than because Woo, it's the alternative option, isn't it? It does attract a certain more independent person, so there is that as part of the angle. Whereas maybe the hosted platforms, more for the sheep that don't need that flexibility and independence. Elliot Richmond says most merchants just want to sell, but WooCommerce gives you an all-in-one advantage. By pairing with WordPress, it combines your entire business management and e-commerce into a single solution. And yeah, that's the thing, like in my blog post where we talk about the wider content management. If you want a membership site, a learning management system, a really sophisticated blog, custom post types, all the stuff that WordPress is great at, then it's an advantage.
Absolutely. And Elliot, if you want to join the marketing team and consult us on that's pretty good messaging. I love it.
Well, he goes further. He also says that he's applying for a job here.
He keeps going.
Yeah, the beauty of the WordPress plus WooCommerce combo is that its extensibility makes it limitless. It's the only all-in-one platform that truly scales to whatever an entrepreneur can dream up. He's got the job.
Put it on the
Right?
homepage.
Let's get Elliot on stage at some of these events. He can have my keynote spot.
Right.
Thank
Is that
you.
all of
That's
them?
great.
Yeah, I think that's the lot. So yeah, that's been great. So I think we've covered the issue in detail and talked a lot about reasons why Woo's the best. We haven't really talked about when it's not, which I think we kind of do need to acknowledge sometimes. For me, I would say it's not the best if you do have really simple needs. You don't maybe want to pay a developer, or you just want something a bit more turnkey. So for me, I'd say maybe you don't need all that flexibility in that case. What would you say, Tamara?
I think I would have to agree that, it's not necessarily the platform for everyone. And the same goes for our competitors too. Their platform may not be the best thing for certain merchants. And I think that we have to be really honest about that. If we onboard a merchant where our solution isn't the best thing for them, they will leave. So let's, provide the best recommendation we can right from the get-go. And I think you've nailed it, that if you're looking for a very standard store, minimal customization, one single provider, managing the operating model on your behalf so that you don't have to worry about controlling infrastructure or even think about payments. Some of the competitors out there might be a very good answer. And I don't think that saying that weakens Woo. I think it actually makes our recommendation even more credible. Again, if you are joining a platform that isn't the best thing for you, there's, some downstream consequences that only causes more pain and distrust with the merchant and the community. I mean, those things get spoken about. So, we talked about where Woo is a fit, and I agree with you that there's some very strong use cases for when it's not. But I also think there's plenty of room in the market. I look at this as the more that are participating, whether they're on our platform or not, the more people selling online is better for everyone. Everyone on this call, everyone in our respective organizations, everyone in the market. When more people have access to the tools that they need, they can succeed in commerce and everyone can win. And so, there's very real value in having an open source alternative in e-commerce. Especially when they may have hit limits in closed platforms, whether that's cost or customization or product model, payments, all the things that we've talked about. So I would rather us be precise than defensive. If we're honest where Woo is a fit and where we're not, merchants will trust us when we say, hey, in your case, maybe it's not the right call. And maybe when it is, they'll come back to us. I believe that.
Yeah, I think those are very good points. I think we have covered a lot of things, and I think there's sort of a few takeaways about how we can all talk about WooCommerce honestly and positively, as a community and also as a company, to really frame and highlight the reasons why you should choose WooCommerce. And I do think there are situations where it being open source is something that merchants would be interested in to hear about and really understand why that's a benefit. And I think we as a company can do a good job of actually highlighting these things through attending these events, talking to people, but also posting on our own website and focusing on our video content. And this podcast is a good example of a place where we could talk about that. And I think we are doing that, and people really like to hear that sort of discussion coming from people who actively work with WooCommerce, with Automatic, outside of WooCommerce. So I think we're really sort of paving the way for this to happen. So yeah, thank you, Tamara, for joining us. It's been super useful to hear sort of your input on how we do marketing, what you expect from the community and things like that. And I hope we can have you on again, later this year or early next year to talk a bit further on anything that's changed and how things are looking.
I would love that. And I appreciate the conversation today, and also feedback. I mean, feedback is a gift. I say this in every opportunity I get to engage with the community. Please keep it coming. Whether it's the positive reinforcements that we heard on the, in the chat today, or, the constructive feedback around onboarding and opportunities for improvements. We're always here to listen, and sometimes we don't see it or catch it all. So please keep it coming.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you online?
I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest. That's what I would suggest. Join me there, please.
And it's Tamara Niesen?
Yes.
Awesome. Next episode, we are joined by Brian Cords, who is a developer advocate at WooCommerce. And we're going to talk all about development tools and workflows for building WooCommerce stores. So this is going to be a great one for developers who build stores for merchants. This one's going to be pre-recorded because some of us are having super long holidays. That's me. So watch out for it on the week of the 13th of July.
Yeah, and if you don't already follow us or subscribe, then go to dothewoo.com and subscribe wherever you like to watch podcasts. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Thank you.